Welcome to Liberty Lighthouse, a teaching ministry dedicated to God's cultural mandate and a biblical worldview. I'm Ray Harker. In this lesson, we'll explore the origins of the phrase separation of church and state. Many Americans may be surprised to learn that the words separation of church and state do not appear in the First Amendment or anywhere else in the Constitution. In fact, here's what the First Amendment actually does say. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. So, where did the phrase separation of church and state actually come from? Well, in October 1801, the Danbury Baptist Association of Connecticut wrote to President Thomas Jefferson, and in their letter they voiced some concerns over religious freedom. They were concerned as to whether the government would ever interfere with the practicing of their faith. Now, bear in mind that these early Americans had just gained independence from England's government as well as from its established church. These pastors had a good reason to be concerned. Then, on January 1st, 1802, Jefferson wrote a letter in reply in which he added the phrase wall of separation between church and state. In his letter, Jefferson was simply underscoring the First Amendment as a protector of the people's religious freedom from government interference. Here is an excerpt from that letter. I contemplate with sovereign reverence that act of the whole American people which declared that their legislature should make no law respecting an establishment of religion, prohibiting the free exercise thereof, thus building a wall of separation between church and state. So there's the phrase, a wall of separation between church and state. Now notice that Jefferson simply quotes the First Amendment, then uses a metaphor, the wall, to separate the government from interfering with religious practice. Remember, the First Amendment puts restrictions on the government, not on the people. The First Amendment, therefore, did not separate church and state. All that it says with respect to Christianity is once again simply this. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Now, all this means, and all that it meant to the 13 states, is simply that the federal government was barred from interfering with the Christian laws and establishments of each of the 13 states. In other words, this was a matter of states' rights exclusively. Each state was free to develop its own Christian legal framework without any interference from the federal government. And, by the way, most states had religious requirements for civic participation. There were laws and guidelines for holding office and for voting. Generally, a person had to be a Christian and believe that the Bible was the divinely inspired Word of God. Such laws were common in early America. For example, the original Pennsylvania Constitution read, "Each member of the legislature, before he takes his seat, shall make and subscribe the following declaration. I do believe in one God, the Creator and Governor of the universe, and the rewarder of the good and the punisher of the wicked. And I do acknowledge the scriptures of the Old and New Testament to be given by divine inspiration." In fact, most of the Founding Fathers were afraid of a centralized government having too much power over the people of the states. Many even refused to sign the Constitution unless these amendments limiting the power of the government were enacted. Any separation was there not to limit religious activities in public, but rather to limit the power of the federal government from interfering with the religious activities in the states. Our founders had biblical insight and inspiration for this concept of republicanism, or states' rights and localized leadership, as it's often called. For example, Exodus 18:21 speaks of such dispersal of power. But select capable men from all the people, men who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain, and appoint them as officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. The intent of the First Amendment was well understood during the founding of our country. The First Amendment was not to keep God out of government. It was to keep government from establishing a national denomination like the Church of England. But as early as 1799, a court did declare, by our form of government, the Christian religion is the established religion. In the letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to the Baptists of Danbury, Connecticut, he made it quite clear that the wall of separation was to ensure that federal government would never interfere with religious activities, simply because religious freedom came from God, not from government. Our first president, George Washington, who certainly knew the intent of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights since he presided over their formation, said in his farewell address, "Of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports." And our second president, John Adams, had this to say about the U.S. Constitution. "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." So, if actions speak louder than words, then it's worth noting that 3 days after Jefferson wrote those words, separation between church and state, he attended Sunday church at the largest congregation in America at the time, the House Chambers of the United States Capitol building. Jefferson's wall of separation applies everywhere in the country, even on government property and without government interference. This is how it is written in the Constitution, and this is how Thomas Jefferson and the rest of our founding fathers practiced it. Well, that concludes today's lesson. For more information about Liberty Lighthouse Ministries or to host one of our live events at your church or group, visit our website at godgov.org. And until next time, please keep praying for our nation and this ministry. Thank you.